The fundamental object we're going to manipulate in algebra is what's called an expression. What is an expression? An expression is just any sequence of mathematical symbols that represents a number. This represents a number part is the key idea here. Now, maybe we know what that number is right now, or maybe we don't. But regardless, an expression represents just one number. So we might have arithmetic expressions. An arithmetic expression is just the kind of expression we see in arithmetic. It might be very simple, just a single number. Obviously, that represents the number 5. We could represent the number 5 in more complicated ways, or very, very complicated ways. But all of these expressions consist of only numbers, symbols for operations, and grouping symbols. We can find out what number they represent by working out all of the arithmetic that we see. Another kind of expression that we will see regularly is a variable expression. The way that we'll recognize a variable expression, it's very simple. A variable expression contains one or more variables. So it might contain just a single variable. It might contain a variable along with some numbers. It might contain several variables. It might contain lots of variables and numbers. But regardless, it contains one or more variable. And since these expressions contain one or more variables, what number this expression represents will depend on what number or numbers the variables represent. So, arithmetic expression always represents the same number. We can find out what it is by working out the arithmetic. Variable expression represents different numbers depending on what the variables represent. Now, not everything we might write in algebra is an expression. If I were to write, for example, 4 plus and then stop writing, that's not an expression. That doesn't represent a number. Why not? Because it doesn't actually make sense. We would need to fill in something after the plus to make sense of it. Another thing that we might write in algebra that is not an expression is something like x equals 4. This is a statement called an equation. It's not an expression. There are two other things that you want to be aware of in the way that we write variable expressions. And both of those have to do with the way we write multiplication. First, if we want to write a number multiplied by a variable, or two variables multiplied together, we don't need a symbol. We just write them next to each other. So we could write 3x to mean 3 multiplied by x, AB to mean A multiplied by B. Technically speaking, we could write x4, but this is weird. You may recall that order doesn't matter in multiplication. Instead of x4, we will write 4x. If we really must write x4, if we have a compelling reason to want to write the variable first, we will typically include the times sign, so the reader knows we really intended that. Wait a minute, that thing's a times sign? Yeah, that's the other thing about multiplication. If there are variables present, we represent multiplication with a dot rather than the little X sign that we're used to avoid confusion. The little X sign looks like the letter X. So, if variables are present, we use the dot for multiplication. If the multiplication actually involves a variable, we don't need a symbol at all, though if we're writing our multiplication in a weird order, we might include the symbol for emphasis. It would be correct to write 3 times x, or a times b, but it would be unusual to do so. You would only do that if you really wanted to emphasize the multiplication.